You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So Glenn, by now I believe most people know the news that federal prosecutors have reportedly obtained audio of Trump acknowledging that he held onto a classified document about a potential attack on Iran. And obviously the rub for Trump here is that it directly undermines his defense that he declassified everything, only to then acknowledge that he was hanging onto a classified document. Is this a fatal blow to Trump's defense?
It is. So this is bad for Trump in so many ways. First of all, as you just mentioned, we've all heard Donald Trump say, for example, he could declassify things with his mind just by thinking them declassified. He's also said that they automatically become declassified when he takes them from the White House. Of course, neither automatic nor telepathic declassification is actually a thing. But importantly, he has said those two things. We now know, based on this reporting, that he retained a classified document that was marked secret, which is actually important for charging purposes under the Espionage Act, well after he left the White House. The reporting is this was sometime during the summer of 2021. And what is he doing? He is allegedly flashing it around, talking about its contents. And for goodness sake, the contents reportedly involved a potential strike on a foreign country by the United States. Feels like national defense information to me. And the reason that is important is because if you mishandle national defense information, well, then you are committing a crime under the Espionage Act. So not only does this completely refute and contradict Donald Trump's claims about having declassified everything, because during this recording, he allegedly is saying, I'd like to show you this, but it is still classified. But it also ups the ante on the espionage charge. Remember, the espionage charge was one of three charges that served as the basis for the Mar-a-Lago search warrant. One was basically unlawfully retaining government documents. The second was obstruction of justice because Donald Trump continued to conceal classified documents after the grand jury had subpoenaed their return. And the third one falls under the Espionage Act, and it is mishandling national defense information. Brian, this is a big ticket crime. It feels like it will be easily provable by the prosecutors given this audio recording. And I'll tell you, I have a hard time believing DOJ will spend much more time waiting to indict him for this charge.
And that was actually one of my questions is because this is such a devastating blow to Trump's whole case here, basically he gave the whole game away with this one. When this kind of thing happens, does it kind of force itself to wrap up the case? Like when you have such a smoking gun like you have here, does it kind of allow you to expedite the rest of the process?
The answer is yes. So here's the thing. When we're involved in long-term investigations, and I did a bunch of them as a career prosecutor, the minute you know you have enough evidence to indict someone, the minute you know you have met that standard of probable cause to indict, every day thereafter, we have to make an assessment. Should we continue to investigate this covertly in the grand jury before we arrest anybody? Or is the danger that this target of the investigation now poses such that we have to move out, indict, arrest, present the target in court, and begin the prosecution? I think when you're talking about compromising national defense information in violation of our nation's espionage laws, particularly information about possible plans the U.S. has to strike a foreign country, Jack Smith has to move out. One of the important reasons is because you charge people to deter others from engaging in similar conduct. And Brian, how can people be expected to keep in confidence our nation's national security information if they see Trump going completely unaccountable for potentially committing the crime of espionage?
Glenn, can you talk for a moment about the difference between probable cause, which you just mentioned before, and then the threshold being beyond a reasonable doubt? Is just one for an indictment and the other necessary for conviction?
Yeah, and there's a huge chasm between those two evidentiary standards. Probable cause is the evidentiary standard that allows us to apply for an arrest warrant, that allows us to apply for a search warrant, and that enables us to indict someone. All three of those things require probable cause. Now, it's important to know that probable cause is less than 50% of the evidence, because the next evidentiary standard, the next higher standard in the law, is a preponderance of the evidence, more likely than not 51%. That's a higher burden than probable cause. But then the granddaddy of all burdens of proof, beyond a reasonable doubt, that is the highest burden of proof known to the criminal justice system, and that is the standard by which a jury gets to vote guilty. If they are convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the evidence proves the charged offenses. No court has ever put a percentage of the evidence necessary to satisfy the beyond a reasonable doubt standard, but I think most criminal practitioners, both the defense on the defense side and on the prosecution side, would tell you that beyond a reasonable doubt means you need to be about 95% sure, 97% sure, based on the evidence that the person committed the charged offenses. Now, importantly, judges instruct juries every day. Beyond a reasonable doubt does not mean to an absolute certainty, a mathematical certainty, or a scientific certainty. It means beyond a reasonable doubt. So that kind of explains the different evidentiary burdens that we're dealing with.
Glenn, how did this leak happen? Because presumably the only people who know about this audio recording having existed are the prosecutors themselves and possibly the person who actually recorded the leak, or who had possession of the leak prior to it being handed over by prosecutors. Does anyone have an incentive here to leak this information?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's been no reporting on how this information ended up in the public square. But what has been reported is, when Trump was being interviewed by granting interviews to reporters or people who were in the process of writing books, and that's where this conversation unfolded. It was Trump was being interviewed by somebody who was authoring or intending to author a book about Mark Meadows. Now, reportedly, there were multiple people in the room, and one of Donald Trump's aides, I think Margot Martin is the name, if I'm remembering correctly, recorded it because they wanted to make sure that the reporters didn't misquote Donald Trump. Well, helpfully, a Trump aide ended up reporting it so that it can now be used as incriminating evidence against Donald Trump before the grand jury and in a future trial. Now, who among the participants in that interview may have revealed this, may have leaked it, may have provided it? That we don't know, but I suspect we'll probably begin to hear more about that moving forward.
And Glenn, just for posterity here, what would happen to a normal person for whom we had the revelation of this audio recording existed after they were accused of stealing classified documents versus what's happening to Donald Trump?
They probably would have been arrested the moment it was discovered by the FBI investigators and the federal prosecutors that they had compromised national security, national defense information in violation of our national espionage laws. I suspect the minute law enforcement authorities found out about that, they would draft a sworn affidavit, a statement of facts. They would have marched in to a federal judge's chambers and they would have applied for an arrest warrant. And that person would have been arrested so fast it would make their head spin. Why? Because our national security would be at risk if we knew somebody who was not authorized to possess or disseminate information about U.S. plans to potentially launch a military attack against a foreign nation. If they had that, they were disclosing it. That person would find themselves locked up promptly. Of course, that's not the way they've been handling things with Donald Trump.
Well, couldn't Trump make the argument then? Because you had just said if someone wasn't authorized to know this information, when he was president, he was authorized to know this information. So does that give him some plausible deniability here? Does that offer him some semblance of a defense that even though he retained this, it's not like he didn't know it before because, of course, as president, he was authorized to know it?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean you get to mishandle it, misuse it, disclose it. So it's not like you can purge it from his head, not that there's a whole lot left in his head, but not that you can purge that information from his memory if he was lawfully in possession of it while he was president. But that doesn't entitle him to take classified documents just because in his capacity as president, he had the lawful right to know this information. So he has no legal defense based on what you just described. The only defense that will provide is kind of the defense in the court of public opinion. And I hope he continues to run out there to these campaign rallies and town halls and run his mouth, because every time he does, he's creating more problems for himself, because every inconsistent statement he makes will be admissible against him at trial, whether he chooses to testify or not.
Well, something tells me that you're not going to have a lot of problems looking for Donald Trump to continue running his mouth. Something tells me that that's going to be that one's in the bag already. We're dealing with the right person. So with that said, obviously a lot to continue reporting on as this case continues to get closer to indictment here. So if you want to keep on top of this stuff as soon as it breaks, make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.